Okay, so now I'm opening my VS Code. And in my VS Code previously, as you can see, we actually connected to the MongoDB in the previous video. So if you haven't watched the previous video, go back and watch it because you're going to learn a lot of things, and we actually did a lot of setup with the Express. So if you haven't watched the part 1 and the part 2 of this series, make sure you go back and watch it to understand everything that we did. So now we want to continue from where we stopped, and in this video we are actually going to set up the .env, and we're also going to set up the user schema for the REST API. So everything you see here was done in my previous video, and you can go and watch it. Remember to watch it and understand, like and share. So now we're opening a new terminal. Currently I want to just run the app so that you can see what we achieved in the previous video, so we can confirm that we actually connected to the MongoDB. So in the new terminal here, I'm gonna type the npm start. So when I type the npm start, you're gonna see we did this. The app is gonna run. So you're gonna see nodemon. Nodemon would actually show too. We also set up the nodemon in the previous video too. So go back and watch it. So now the nodemon is running, and also we are waiting. Okay, you can see the REST API port connected to 9000. So now you can see we achieved the REST API port connection. The only thing that is pending now is that I'm supposed to see that MongoDB have connected, but it's not showing here. I don't know why it's not showing. Maybe it's still trying to connect to the MongoDB. Okay, they send error connecting to MongoDB. Let's restart. Let's save the work again. Let's restart the nodemon. So if I actually restart nodemon, you're gonna see that it will show you, okay, MongoDB have been connected. So finally it has connected to the MongoDB now. So all this was achieved in my previous video. Go back and watch it. So in this video now, I'm going to install .env by typing the npm i.env. So you'll be asking, what is this .env? .env helps you to store variables without actually exposing it. So they actually way of securing your variables. Like I'm going to use it to store a lot of variables. You're going to see how to use a .env to store variables. So right now the .env have been installed, and you want to confirm that. You'll be like, is .env actually installed? You want to check it out. You go to the package.json. Remember to install it, we had to type the npm.env. So now to confirm this is installed, we're going to go to the package.json now. And in the package.json, you're going to see the .env here. That is it. So first of all, now we need to create a .env file. This is where we are going to store all our variables. So you're going to see a .env file here. And in this .env file, we're going to store the MongoDB URL, and we're going to store the port value, 9000. Then we're also going to access this value from the .env file. But before that, we have to import the .env. So to be sure we import the .env, we're going to say constant.env is going to be equal to require. We're going to require the .env to import it. That is how we import in Node.js. So we're going to say require.env. This way we have just imported the .env, and the next thing is to initialize the .env. How do we initialize the .env? By calling the .env.config. That way we've initialized it now. So the .env has been initialized by calling the .env.config. The next thing is to save this variable in the .env file. So to save those variables now, we're going to say port. That is the name of the variable we want to save. And we're going to assign a value to that variable, which is 9000. So you see here, we're going to say the port value now is going to be 9000. So you don't need the semicolon. In the env file, you don't use semicolon. You don't use all those, comma. You don't use all those curly braces here. We just give it a name and a value. And to access that value, we're going to call the process.env.port. So that is it. The port is the name that we assigned to the variable. So if you go to this, if you go inside the env file, you're going to see a name called port. That is it. So you see that name port is the name of that variable you see here. So the next thing is to store the URL now. To store that URL, we're also going to create another value in the env file called the MongoDB URL. So the next value you want to create or store here is the MongoDB URL. So that is the Mongo. You're going to remove these things here up. We're going to remove this. We don't need that. I'm also going to remove it here. So now we have the URL here. We have the MongoDB URL. So now we have two values inside the .env file. We have the port and we have the MongoDB URL. So now we're going to save our work. When we save it, we're going to run the app. Right. So going back to my index.js, I'm going to access this variable, the MongoDB URL, by calling the process.env.mongo URL. So we're going to have the process.env.mongo URL. So that is it. So now we have accessed the two variables we just created inside the env file. We have accessed the port and we have accessed the Mongo URL. Now the next thing, save your work. And when you save your work, we're going to run the app and you still see that the app is going to access the port, is going to access the MongoDB URL, and it's going to connect to that MongoDB URL and it's going to connect to that port. You understand? Let's shift this initialization up here because we don't need the .env initialized down here. We're going to shift it up. So now we set now. We've done the variable and we've done everything. So this is how you store variables in a .env file. The next thing to do is let's open a new terminal. Well, first of all, we need to close all these old terminals we had here. I'm going to close all the old terminals. I'm going to terminate all the old terminals now. So all the old terminals have been terminated, and now we're going to open a new terminal. And in this new terminal, I'm going to save all my works. Then I'm going to say npm start. So when I run the npm start, you're going to see it's still going to connect to the port. It's still going to connect to the Mongo URL. The once it connects and everything should connect, that means that we are in the right step and that we have actually properly set up the .env variable. I'm going to say npm start now. You're going to see that it's going to connect. It's still going to connect to the port and it's still going to connect to the MongoDB URL, meaning that we're in the right track. So you're seeing RestApi port connected 9000 and MongoDB have been connected. So you see these two things being achieved here means that we're in the right direction. So now the next thing to do is to make sure that we have a user schema. This user schema will help the user will help Node.js know how the user is going to look like. We're going to tell Node.js that this user is going to have an email, this user is going to have a password, this user is going to have a lot of things here. So we're going to describe the format that for the user, we're going to describe it here so that Node.js will know. So to do that, we have to create a model. This model class will contain the user format, also known as the user model. So we're going to create inside the models, we're going to create a user.js file. So this user.js file will contain the properties and the characteristics of the user. So you see user.js. That is it. So before we create the user model or the user schema, we're going to do this for the MongoDB. We're going to create it for MongoDB. So that way, in order to create a user schema for the MongoDB, we need the Mongoose library here. So we need to import the Mongoose library. And we're going to make use of this Mongoose library to create a user schema or a user model. So now we're going to say constant Mongoose is equal to require Mongoose. That is how we always import, remember? So that's what we're going to do now. So now, the importing, we're going to say the constant Mongoose is equal to require Mongoose. Mongoose. So that way we have imported the Mongoose here, and now the next thing to do is to create a user schema. So this user schema will describe the properties that will that the user would actually register or log in with. So the user schema is equal to new mongoose.schema. I'm gonna say mongoose.schema. Yeah. So now this schema will contain the name, the email, the password, and a lot of things here. So now we actually imported the mongoose and we actually created a user schema using the mongoose. So now I'm gonna say this is the mongoose create a model for the user. So the user model is gonna have a name. We're gonna say name. This is the name of the user. We're also gonna have the email, which is the email of the user. We're gonna have the password. And after the password, we're gonna have other things. I don't know, because we cannot just have the name, email, the password. We need other things alongside with this, like we need the followers. We need the following. In case the user have a follower or is following somebody, you're gonna show it here. We need the following. Also, the user is gonna have a profile picture, so we're gonna describe it here. That the user will have a profile picture, and the user is also gonna have a cover photo. So we're gonna have a cover picture here. We call it a cover photo. So now we're describing the user for the node or for the JS to understand that any user registering or logging in into the API is going to have all these characteristics. You understand? So now we've done with making the user schema, the name, we gave it email, we gave it the password, we gave it the profile picture, we gave the user a cover photo, we gave a user the following, we gave a user followers. So what else is remaining now? Also, we need a timestamp. This timestamp will contain the registration date, the time the user registered on the app, to contain the time the user created an account. So when the user creates an account, the timestamp here will tell you, okay, the time and the date the account was created. So you see, we need a timestamp there. Okay, so we're one step forward now. So now the next thing after doing this is to create describe the properties. Some properties gonna be string, some gonna be integers, some gonna be an array. Like the username, the email, the password, they're gonna be a string. So we have to describe the type of the variable type of these properties here. So I'm starting with the name. I'm saying here that the name is of type string. The name is gonna be of type string, and that is it. We're gonna say the email is gonna be of type string. The password too is gonna be of type string. The profile picture too is gonna be of type string. The cover photo is also gonna be of type string. Majority of it, all our things gonna be of type string except the followers and the following, which is gonna be of type array. So you're gonna see the following is gonna be of type array, and the followers too is gonna be of type array. And followers too is gonna be of type array. So you see, everything they have their own type. You know, the name is string, the email is string, the password is a string, the profile picture is a string. But the cover photo is the followers and following are the only two properties here, or with a type of an array. So now we have to assign default value to this. In case you don't have any followers, it's going to have a default value of an empty array. As you can, by default, it's going to be an empty array. And also the following, by default, in case you do not have anybody following, is going to be of type an empty array. Then the cover photo, in case you have no cover photo, is going to be of type, or it's going to have a default value of an empty string. Then the profile picture too is going to have a default value of type empty string. Then the password is going to have a default value of type empty string. You're going to have the email, going to have a default value of type empty string. But I think, okay, let me just give it a default value first. What I just remembered is that default value are for values that are not actually required. That means that you don't necessarily need these values. They can be null. But an email cannot be null because it's required, it's necessary. So we're going to say required is true, because we're going to require this. It's necessary. A user should register and log in with an email. You understand? So the password too should be required. The name here is going to have a default value because it's not going to be required. It's optional. So the name is going to have a default value. But the password should have a required because it's not going to be optional. It's necessary that you put a password. So that one is actually really required here. It's going to be true. So the rest of it are optional, meaning that you can decide to leave it null or not. So when you leave it null, we're going to assign a default value to it. So now I think we're done with describing our user schema. We've done a lot of description here. So this is easy to understand. If you're following me, you should know now how to set up a user schema. But we're going to say the email is going to be unique because we don't want to have two emails of the same type. All the email in the database must be different. They must be different. We're not going to have two emails that look alike or the same type. Unique means that we're going to have only one type of email. No two emails should look the same. So that is why unique, So the email is going to be unique. So I'm writing it here for you to understand. So the email is a user cannot register without an email, and that is why it's required. Okay. Also the same thing here. A user cannot register without a password. So now we're done with setting up the schema. The next thing is that we need to export this schema, because if you do not export it, then you cannot access it in any other file. In order to access this schema from any other file, we have to export it. So now it's necessary we export this schema so that we can access it in the index.js file. We can access it in any other file we want to use this user schema. So right now it's not exported, meaning that if we want to use it in another file, it's not going to work. We have to export it. So we're going to say user is equal to mongoose.model. This is how we export the schema, mongoose.model. So inside this place here, we're going to write first of all the table name. I want to store these users in a table called my user table. So I've just created a table now. By doing this, you have created a table in the MongoDB database. The name of this table now is my user table. This mongoose was gotten from this user schema now. That user schema you see there, we want to pass it into this parameter. That's what we passed in here. So now to export it, I'm going to say module.export, and you have to export is equal to user. So module.export is equal to user now. That is it. So now we have the user schema, and now in the next video I am going to show you how I'm going to make use of this schema. So in this video we just created a user schema to describe our user and properties the user is going to have. The user is going to have the email, password, followers, following. We exported the user so that we can use it in any other JavaScript file. So in the next video, we're going to use this schema to register the user, and we're going to use this schema to log in the user.